that lesbians are entitled to. All Lesbian Caucus members, past and present, have agreed to the content of that document. Coming to agreement about what the LBOR should say wasn't easy. Catherine Kinney bravely wrote the first draft. The rest of the caucus members suggested many changes, large and small, and eventually they had a document that everybody liked, and it was approved by the WDI USA Board. Since writing the LBOR, the Lesbian Caucus has authored a number of position papers on topics of interest to U.S. lesbians, and you can also find those papers on our website. Since the adoption of the LBOR by the Lesbian Caucus and by WDI USA, the LBOR has also been adopted by several other radical feminist lesbian organizations in other countries, including Las Reloaded in Germany, Lesbian Resistance in New Zealand, the Countess Lesbian Working Group in Ireland, and the WDI Australia-New Zealand Lesbian Caucus. This international group has now formed a network called LBOR International with the intention of sharing information and strategies, amplifying each other's voices globally, and making statements that carry the added clout of a global voice for radical feminist lesbians. There are currently 6 Lesbian Caucus members: Lauren Levey, the coordinator, Dana Stanley, Catherine Kinney, Heather Scalzi, and Arla Heil, who will all be speaking today. And a special thanks to Lauren Legiri, who will be assisting with recording this presentation. The first speaker on our panel is Lauren Levey. Lauren has been fighting for women and lesbians since the 1960s, when she was in college and worked for abortion rights. Since then, Lauren has run feminist consciousness-raising groups and lesbian coming out groups, and has been pushing back against transgenderism since the 1990s. Presently, Lauren is on the WDI USA Board of Directors and coordinates the Lesbian Caucus and LBOR International. Lauren?
Thanks so much, Zinetta. Can you hear me? So, it seems as though it should be self-evident to say that all radical feminists, whether lesbian or not, need to be able to work together. But sadly, straight radical feminists and lesbian radical feminists have not always had a history of mutual respect and easy collaboration. So many of the creators and theorists and activists and writers of the second wave of the women's liberation movement were lesbians, way out of proportion to our numbers in the general population. Mary Daly, Kathy Sarachild, Kate Millett, Audre Lorde, and Jill Johnston are just a few examples of the lesbians who created the second wave of the WLM. Despite this undeniable fact, there were some embarrassing efforts by straight women's liberationists to hide lesbians and even exclude us from the movement that so many lesbians had been crucial in creating. In 1969, the president of the National Organization for Women, Betty Friedan, briefly but famously called lesbians the Lavender Menace. What she meant was that visible lesbians would damage the credibility, the respectability, and the acceptability of the women's liberation movement. So she demanded that lesbians either stay in the closet, or stay out of the media, or stay out of the movement. Because, the thinking went, lesbians would give the movement a disreputable appearance. Fortunately for the movement and for all of us, lesbians weren't having it, and the women's liberation movement quickly moved beyond Betty Friedan. I mean, it's consistently been lesbians who have pushed for women-only spaces. And it's been straight women who have pushed, sometimes, to bring men into those spaces. History has a way of being forgotten and then repeating itself. I think most of you here at this convention understand why lesbians are crucial and even central to our movement. But just for the record, I'm going to tell you some of the reasons why the women's liberation movement needs lesbians especially. For one thing, lesbians are uniquely situated to critique both gender in all its forms and heterosexuality as an institution. We are outsiders with respect to both. Lesbians break the most basic rules of patriarchy just by being lesbians. That is, by being women who seek out other women as community and as sexual partners and deny access to men. We live at a certain distance from both feminine compliance and from heterosexuality. Lesbians don't share a bed with a man they love. Adult lesbians mostly aren't living in a home with a man who is head of the household. This modest but crucial distance from men gives lesbians an increased opportunity to develop a more objective perspective on men, and also on heterosexuality and patriarchy. If you don't love men, and if you don't live with men, there's probably a better chance you may not put their interests first, even though we're all of us women who grew up under patriarchy. A second reason why lesbians are critical to the women's liberation movement is that lesbians can provide models, albeit imperfect ones, of woman-centered family and woman-centered community. These things would otherwise be nearly unimaginable. So my advice to straight radical feminists is to create opportunities for lesbians to be seen and to speak and to listen to lesbians. We have unique insights, and you may find them useful. Thirdly, the visibility of lesbian community and of thoughtful, effective, beautiful, lovable lesbians is the single best antidote to the draw of the transgender cult for young lesbians. Help us give young lesbians an attractive alternative to transgenderism. It's not that hard. Just help us to be visible and to be heard, and we'll do the rest. And finally, lesbians need your support and solidarity because lesbians are presently the most specifically targeted and persecuted group of women by men. Here's how. Lesbians are once again being forced by law to be recloseted as outlaws, to meet in secret to evade the presence of male predators who the law says must be included in all our public spaces. Lesbian university students are being forced to share dormitory rooms with men. Incarcerated lesbians are forced to share living and sleeping space with violent male predators. Lesbian bars, which existed even in the 1950s when being a lesbian was a crime, no longer exist. They are universally overrun with men who claim to be lesbians, who come into those bars to harass lesbians, and who can no longer be expelled. Lesbian online dating sites are filled with men who claim to be lesbians. Lesbians are being thrown off of such sites when we object or identify men as men. Lesbians are harassed openly and with impunity in the streets as trans-exclusionary TERFs, right-wing bigots, racists, and Nazis who deserve to be tortured and killed for rejecting the notion that men can be women, as people who are really men but won't admit it, and as ugly when we fail to comply with men's beauty standards. Lesbians, along with other women who reject gender identity ideology, are physically attacked when we try to speak out about our rights in public places. And as we have all seen, police have repeatedly failed to protect political rallies. Lesbian history has been erased by gender identity activists. Lesbians need our history. We need it restored and we need it preserved. Lesbian girls and other non-conforming girls are being told they are probably boys and are having their bodies mutilated with irreversible hormones and surgeries that will not only sterilize them and harm their hearts and bones, but will also likely preclude sexual gratification forever. Gender identity indoctrination of kids is carried out in public schools, often deliberately without parents' knowledge. State agencies are undermining the parent-child relationship in order to indoctrinate kids into gender identity ideology. Here's a little structural analysis. The radical feminist theorist Marilyn Frye once wrote, "When women separate, we are simultaneously controlling access and defining. we are doubly insubordinate, since neither of these is permitted. So what we all need to understand structurally is that lesbians are used as an example and as a warning of what will happen to any woman who ever refuses sexual access to a man or prioritizes women over men. If you do either of those things, you may be called a lesbian, accurately or not. And you have greatly increased your odds of being personally ostracized, defunded, physically attacked, and otherwise punished accordingly. So the patriarchs and their supporters weaponize lesbians against other women. So nobody much wants to appear to be a lesbian, not even lesbians. Short hair on a woman signifies lesbian culturally, unless it's pink or blue. Don't comply. It's in all women's interests not to heed that warning and not to comply by sacrificing lesbians, because it's how they keep all women in line, and it's how they keep lesbians and straight women separated from each other personally and politically. And they will come for you next, even if you do comply. There is no level of compliance that will make you safe if you have any hope of being effective in advancing women's liberation. It is in your interests as women's liberationists to support lesbian community, to amplify lesbian voices, to make radical feminist community with lesbians, and in fact, to generally center and promote lesbians in your activism, as opposed to, for instance, obsessively dropping hints about your boyfriend or husband, making sure everyone knows you're certainly not a lesbian, and that you love men, or at least that you love one man more than anyone else in the world. So instead of all that, a revolutionary strategy might be to say, lesbians are my sisters. I love lesbians. I will never comply. I will never cooperate in my own oppression or in the oppression of any of my sisters. And by the way, here and here and here is a lesbian speaking eloquently about all women. You could say that. Don't let them ignore lesbians or disrespect lesbians. Don't let them divide and conquer the sex class called women and girls. I'm going to end with one more request from my straight sisters. And you may not like it much. Here's a modern trope that illustrates one reason why lesbians don't always have perfect trust for straight feminists. So many of our straight sisters say so often, I know my heterosexual relationship and the stuff I have to do to maintain it are shoring up patriarchy, but I'm straight, so what can I do? So here's my answer. Here's what else you can do. First, you can stop reciting that damn trope all the damn time as though you are helpless to conform your actions to your principles, as though you are a victim of your own sexuality, and as though your annoying trope is a gotcha. And second, you can maybe stop doing stuff in your personal life that shores up patriarchy to the extent that it's within your power. Not setting up a household with a man, not exchanging long-term vows with him and the state, not cleaning up after him and fixing his feelings. At least some of that may well be within your power. The immediate personal payoff to you is that you'll then have more time and energy to deepen your relationships with women and to build women's community. The political benefit is that you'll be helping to accelerate the women's liberation movement. A business analyst named Brian Solis has said, community is much more than belonging to something. It's about doing something together that makes belonging matter. To put it another way, the personal is political, and together we can win faster and better by building not just a movement, but a community. With all the sisters, lesbian and not, in which we listen to each other, and promote each other and do it without shame.